morning, ladies and gentlemen. Also from my side, it's an honor being here in Hamburg. It's always fascinating being in this city that has a long heritage in shipping. Also a warm welcome to the distinguished panelists that we have today, starting with Dr. Johann Killinger, Managing Partner from Bush Group, Mr. Nitin Shukla, Vice President Shipping and Trading Supply at Shell, and Mr. Philipp Kroepels, Director New Energy from MB Energy. The topic that we will discuss is about the new energy landscape, which is characterized by a drive for decarbonization, digitalization, and decentralization. Before we start the questions, I would like to ask the panelists if they could give 2-3 words about their companies. And why I'm asking this, because reading the history of these specific companies, it's quite interesting how they have developed and all the offerings that are able to do. So I would start with Mr. Johann Killinger.
Thank you. I'm representing the Bush Group, which is my company, founded 104 years ago as a stevedoring company in the port of Hamburg. I took it over a bit more than 20 years ago. Today we are focusing on shipping, one side, Leonard and Bloomberg, container ships, tankers, and recently also mini bulkers for regional trades, and also ports, in particular energy ports, offshore wind, particularly, and we brought, that probably also brings me to the panel, we're the initiator of Germany's first private land-based LNG terminal in Stade, which is 40 kilometers from Hamburg, which is under construction.
Thank you, Johann. Nitin, I think everybody knows Shell, but just two words.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for this opportunity of having me over to this panel. Starting with Shell. Shell is an integrated energy company. We operate across the full value chain from upstream, midstream, downstream, trading, across multiple fuels, including traditional fuels as well as new fuels. I particularly look after shipping, so I'm Vice President for shipping for Shell, specifically for our shipping requirements for our trading business, which is a number of tankers which we charter from the industry. We are also a fuel supplier, so we remain interested in industry as a key stakeholder for fuel supply as well. Thank you, Dionysios.
Thank you, Nitin. And Philipp, you can mention a few words about MB Energy.
I'm Philipp Kroepels. Thanks for having me here. MB Energy may not be as well known as Shell, but we used to trade under the names Mabernaft, Oil Tanking, Bowman, and I think that probably rings some bells with most of you. Plus, by the way, another 45 brands, and it was decided to create a new brand under which all the other businesses are being included. We are Germany's largest importer of liquid fuels, so not only maritime fuels, but the whole range for transportation, aviation, heavy industries, agriculture, but also heating oil for single homes in Germany. Family owned, third generation, so in that sense very different from you. It's, I think, good to have some different perspectives here. Don't be misled by family. We are one of the largest companies in Germany from family-owned perspective. Revenues around 15-16 billion, and we import every year between 14 and 16 million tons of products. Global footprint, but our core region is Northwestern Europe, and in Hamburg we more or less supply every other vessel with fuels. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now I think we can start with the questions, starting with the big picture. As we look at the maritime industry in Q4 2025, where do you see dependencies? This question actually goes to all the panelists, starting with Nitin, if okay.
Sure. Important question in current times. Dionysios, if I bring us back to the title of this particular panel, which talks about energy security. Yeah, energy security in current times would mean that customers, users, societies are able to access the supplies they need at the time they need. And in the current times, with the geopolitical context which we operate in, there is lots going on. And that means that that the fuel suppliers as well as fuel customers, who are often in different places, have to be connected in a pretty flexible supply chain. And I would say that shipping plays a very critical role in that value chain, whether it is for existing fuels or it is for new fuels. And we've seen that multiple times in recent, I would say, last 4 to 5 years, whether it was the context around European geopolitical situation, tensions in Middle East, etc. I would say that the flexibility with which shipping industry has been able to respond is quite an important one. And I would say that is a key dependency of all the players in value chain, is something which I would mention, just to start with.
Okay.
You hit it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fully second your view, Nitin. Maybe some additional comments given today's uncertainties in the world. Diversification of supply obviously is very important when it comes to sources and also in terms of products. Owning infrastructure, by the way, is for us supplying you with fuels also very important. We are Germany's second largest tank terminal operator. And the number one is right now in the process of being sold to a US-American company called Sunoco. I will not comment on that, but if you keep energy security, resilience, robustness in mind, nowadays it's also worth taking another look who owns what. Right? And we can only supply you if we have access to storage, etc., etc., etc. So that is, from a fuel supplier point of view, also a very important variable which we need to include in the entire game.
Thank you. I'm used to sitting next to you and there's nothing left.
Come on, I'm sure you find something.
So dependencies, as you know, basically everything depends on everything. But in particular, regarding energy, beside what you mentioned, I see, of course, the geopolitical risk of changing supplies, and in particular also the energy transition dependency, which both are, uncertain, both involve uncertainties for the business. Particularly the energy transition, which seemed to be clear until a few weeks ago. Now it's becoming a bit more unclear again, making it not easier for shipping companies to comply with. So, on the other hand, I think dependencies, this kind of dependencies, that's part of business, that's part of shipping in particular, and this makes it interesting. We have to deal with it.
Okay. Now, the present energy conversation seems to be dominated by biofuels and LNG as the preferred alternatives. What are the risks to that assumption? Johann, I would start. You can start this question.
Yeah, biofuels or LNG?
Biofuels and LNG, I think.
It's LNG, I do not see short term not so much of a risk. Compared to 2 years ago, in particular shipping focused much more on LNG recently, which I can very much understand, given that LNG is abundant around the world and there's much more coming on stream, coming to the market, giving it cleaner than previous solution, giving it's safe compared to other solutions like ammonia. And LNG is increasingly already became kind of a world market, not yet as oil, but it's getting there. So for the next 10 years, I'm not too much afraid of dependency there. Or on the long term, this is going to change because it's still fossil, and we have to look for new alternatives. But I think short term makes a lot of sense to focus on LNG.
Philipp, you share the same view?
Yeah, I think for now, LNG is the cheapest cost of compliance, right? It checks all the boxes. We would always recommend not to bank on just one fuel. When Russian attacked Ukraine, some shipping companies who had bought quite a few vessels on LNG only, they were exposed heavily to increasing LNG prices, really heavily. So obviously nothing new for you, but I think also diversify the fuel supply, dual fuels. I think this is really the way to go. One word to ammonia, classic one between Johann and me. Yes, ammonia, of course, is a different product than LNG, but I think the industry can handle this product. It is a commodity for decades, not in shipping, obviously, but 200 million tons are produced every year, of which 10%, so 20 million, is shipped every year over the ocean. So I think it's fair to say that also the shipping industry per se can handle that product. It reminds me a bit of the LNG discussion 20 years ago, where LNG was a new fuel. Authorities were very, very concerned and nervous in Hamburg. It never went through in terms of bunkering. And when we talk to shipping companies, they tell us that there's a lot to be learned from LNG for ammonia. No need to reinvent the wheel. You have to, of course, train the crews appropriately, etc., but it can be done. But I agree with Johann, it's not now. It's certainly beyond 2030. First vessels are being built, though. I mean, there are dual fuels, but they are in the shipyards. The methane slip, that may be a topic. It's still fossil, but let's see. Biofuels, obviously depends a bit which biofuel you're talking about, but there are some supply constraints on the horizon at some point in time, right? And I think that also is worth being kept in mind.
Thank you, Philipp. Just since we are discussing a lot about LNG, I would ask Nitin about methane slip, because I'm fully aware of oil majors' strong concern and efforts, let's say, to minimize all, let's say, methane slip sources. You could mention something about this?
Sure. Happy to comment on that, Dionysios. But if I just build up a little bit around that same energy security theme, and even beyond shipping, if you look at LNG in particular, there is significant growth, which we expect. We publish a report called LNG Outlook every year. And the most recent report talks about significant growth out to 2040, primarily driven by three things. Continued demand growth in Asia, specifically India, China, number of Southeastern countries. Secondly, with decarbonization of heavy industry, hard to electrify sectors, including transport, including shipping. And thirdly, also real good growth predicted from new tech industry. Yeah. So there is substantial growth which is coming in, and LNG is very well placed in terms of multiple sources, ability to move supplies to respond to demand in various markets. So for the market to be clearing at a price which reflects that. So very well placed from that particular perspective. The market was at around 400 million tons per annum in 2024. We're expecting supply of around 170 million ton additional coming in the next few years, though there are uncertainties associated with timings around it. So there is quite a lot going on there. For shipping specifically, I think this year around 6 million tons LNG consumed in shipping sector. We expect it to grow up to 16 million tons by 2030. So there is lots which makes sense from fuel supply perspective. There is no one solution for shipping industry. I think if you go back to the basics of, you'd start with avoid emissions where we can through energy efficient technologies. You would reduce where we can, and that's where the new fuels come into place, whether it's ammonia, whether it's LNG or other fuels being discussed. And thirdly, also compensate, whether it's carbon credits or other mechanism. Specifically around LNG methane slip, I would say among the suite of fuels which are available today, this is one which is safe, which is scalable, and which is operationally proven. Methane slip, I think this is a continued piece of work. There are a number of studies which point to both well to wake as well as well to tank as well as tank to wake emissions. Most recently, there is a study published by Rystad Energy which talks about actual asset-based measurements. And the journey which we see is in the right direction, and there is more work to be done there, but clearly there is progress being made around overall emissions. Of course, it depends on the type of engine, the vehicle, the vessel configuration, etc. But clearly, progress being made there.
Okay. Thank you, Nitin, for this comprehensive insight. Now, touching a bit on regulations about, for example, fuel EU Maritime. How do you see the position of LNG short-term and long-term, respecting fuel EU Maritime? Starting with Philipp, if okay.
That is okay. Yeah. Difficult question. I think LNG in the short term is going to remain. In the longer term, there's a bit of a question mark. I think it will not go away, but there will be incentives for the CO2-free fuels. We see something there on the horizon or already for ammonia and methanol, and I think this will increase, but it doesn't mean that LNG is no longer a viable option. There will be more alternatives, as Nitin said. It's not just one fuel. I'll give you one example. That's public, I can share it. We are just in the process of talking to TUI Cruises, right? So a cruise vessel operator co-owned by TUI and Carnival Cruises. And that's about green methanol, right? And it's cruise. Cruise ships probably don't like the idea too much of ammonia. They also don't like the idea too much of LNG because passengers on board, they would like to feel good, if I may say so, right? And it depends which segment you're in, and the speed per segment of the fuel type is different. So, and I think the Fuel EU Maritime will have to address that, and I think they will. We see a degree of, let me say, reality is kicking in. Right? 5 years ago, it was all very naive. Politicians tend to think what has happened in the oil industry for over 100 years in development, we can do this in clean fuels in 10 or 20. That obviously is not the case. Right? It takes more time. But I think all fuels will have the role to play also in the regulations and legislations.
Okay. Something, Johann, to add on this, or everything is covered?
Yeah, basically everything is covered. So short term, no issues. Long term, but the issues you mentioned is of course still fossil. However, I think also given the recent developments, I think long term will take longer to be there. So everything will, as you also mentioned, take a bit longer.
Yeah. Dionysios, if I can add some numbers to that perspective, Fuel EU Maritime specifically recognizes, that LNG in its current form reduces GHG emissions to the tune of 3 to 17% of as compared to other fuels. And if you take the vessel age of 25 years, it is very well compliant for next 10 to 15 years, depending on the engine configuration, vessel configuration, etc. What we are already seeing is, specifically in Europe, incoming streams of biomethane, so bio-LNG, which can be dropped in and blended into the fuel, which reduces it further by 33% at the least, but it can go as high as more than 100% negative, depending on what input fuel do you use. That gives industry a good 15 years' time to build the value chain, supply chain around synthetic LNG in future. So that is clearly there is a path which is possible and feasible, as we have seen from past experiences in evolution of technology, which starts to become a very clear pathway, I would say.
Okay. Okay, we touched a bit about methanol and ammonia, but I would ask, let's say, do you see now in Europe the same momentum for methanol and ammonia? Do you see some, let's say, halting, or the momentum keeps as strong as before? Johann, if you can comment on this.
I think we mentioned this already.
Yeah.
I think the speed is slowing down a bit, which is good. I think not because simply because it needs to stay feasible, the transition, particularly for energy in general, not particular shipping. I mean, there's a lot happening in the production of green fuels, particularly ammonia. We just returned from Canada, where they have ambitions. A lot is going on in the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia and other countries, for supply of ammonia as a chemical, but in particular also as a possibility to transport hydrogen. Particularly for shipping, I think we mentioned this before. For the moment, it's been more and more decided for pro LNG. This will also, I think, stay longer as we might anticipate now. But in the overall balance of fuels, shipping is just does not play the major role. Yeah, it will come, but it will take a bit longer.
Okay. Yes.
If I may add, I think on the ammonia piece in particular, but also methanol to some extent, let's not forget the infrastructure, right? I mean, if you want to supply vessels, we need to have ammonia tanks, ammonia bunkering stations all around the world. Well, this will take time. So in our view, the solution is to build green shipping corridors, let's say between Hamburg and Halifax or something like that, where you have then point-to-point traffic, right? Dedicated ships going back and forth. That's how we see it will kick off with ammonia, right? Then you have ammonia facilities here. We are just in the permitting of Germany's first large-scale ammonia terminal here in Hamburg. And then you need one in Halifax, right? Let's not ignore that ammonia onshore infrastructure approximately is 4 times more expensive than conventional fuels, right? So an ammonia tank, sizable one, let's say 80,000 cubes, will cost you 200 million, and the diesel tank is 50. All right, so this will not happen overnight. Somebody has to pay for this, and needs to be built. This takes years. All right? I can tell you from our Hamburg project, assuming we get the permit approved, knock on wood, that'll happen anytime soon. Well, then you need to start construction, right? That takes at least 2-3 years until you are ready, just to give you a feeling. With methanol, it's way easier. You but you can convert gasoline tanks as such that they can store both methanol and gasoline. Couple of millions capex and you're done with that, right? So that also dictates, I think, a bit the speed of which fuel will come at what point in time. And it's not only the availability of the fuel per se, but also the availability of the infrastructure needed to supply you guys.
Okay, thank you, Philipp. Nitin, any activities of Shell globally on ammonia, methanol?
Not on ammonia. On specifically LNG, of course, we have a pretty large presence. We have been one of the pioneers there. We are bunkering in 28 locations currently. We have 13 bunkering vessels operating, and we've placed order for a few more new build by the owners. So very much in there. Methanol, of course, in theory, you are right. There is experience in the industry, but it truly depends on availability of fuel at a competitive price, which is green. Yeah, and that's where the challenge comes from. So that's what I would mention.
Now, looking very far in the future, actually, Johann, I would ask about nuclear power, since you have a ship management company. What is your view on nuclear power for shipping? It's
In the moment, it's getting traction, but for warships,
Yeah.
I would say. Of course, there's discussion about nuclear power for ships. It might become feasible for very large container ships. Or apart from that, I think it will not have a big impact because of all the issues related to nuclear power. We're all aware of security and also the public opinion on nuclear power. So I think in particular shipping, I'm reluctant to see a big future for energy generation. In general, I think it's a bit different. I think there we definitely missed the boat in Germany a little bit. But I don't want to have start a new discussion here. But there has been a lot of development in the world, small reactors which burn almost all radioactivity out of the fuel and so on. So this is more interesting than in particular in Germany, we believe. But for shipping, I don't see it.
Okay. A question now for Philipp about onboard carbon capture. Does MB Energy, what is the view of MB Energy? Are there any plans for, let's say, being involved in this supply chain?
I think on a broader scale or perspective, we do believe that carbon capture overall will have to play a role. Right? We will not be able to reach net zero just by supplying clean fuels. Overall industries, not only specifically shipping. Right? There will be industries for those it is way too expensive. It is cheaper to supply with diesel, let's say, and then you capture the emissions, liquefy the CO2, either use it as a feedstock or put it into permanent sequestration onshore or offshore. So that's not on a vessel, that's larger scale, right? And we have these projects. They're not yet allowed in Germany, but we're also operating in other European countries. There it is allowed. When it comes to ships, I have to be honest, I do lack a little bit the engineering skills for that. What does it cost to install it on a ship? I don't know. If it's feasible, yes, I would have the vision to see that happening if it's cost competitive, and definitely can be one of the solutions. But it depends, as always, let's face it, it always depends on price. Right? I'm not telling you anything new there. We always have this triangle of security of supply, sustainability, and price. And if things are too expensive, they will not happen. Right? So I think that is, it applies to everything, basically.
If I can just add to what Philipp mentioned, the value chain is complex, but it is good to see that certain parts of value chain are being technically de-risked as we speak. Yeah, I'm not talking about as much onboard carbon capture, but carbon in general. We, through a project called Northern Lights joint venture, we have collected CO2 from some emitters, transported it on liquid CO2 ships, and sequestered it into the ground below. So the experience is being built. It's not straightforward, as you say, even for liquid CO2 shipping. Again, the commerciality comes into the play in terms of what size you make commercial ships for. Depends on how much your customers are willing to commit in terms of volume as well as duration. But it is good to see that some aspects of CO2 value chain are being de-risked with commercial decisions in place. And technology will take time, and there'll be more work, of course, required to be done there.
Johann, you wanted to comment something?
Just for this audience, what I definitely welcome in here in Germany is that Germany leaves a little bit its more ideological stance on CCS, or carbon capture and storage, and also blue hydrogen. So they're becoming more open. It's not yet allowed, but it's on the way to get there. So which is important, that Germany does not exclude itself from the worldwide development of this field.
Okay. Okay. So taking the above together, can we say that maritime is in transition, or is it more a process of adjustment? Yeah, Johann.
Oh, you gave me this question before, and I was really thinking about it. It's as always, the answer is the definition. Of course, in a way, it's both. The energy transition is definitely transition. It's going away from fossil fuels to new fuels. However, it's not coming overnight. It's coming step by step, and so it feels like just an adaptation or an adjustment.
Okay. Maybe any other comments from the panel?
Yeah, I would reiterate, someone has said that we always overestimate change in the short term and underestimate, the technology change which will happen in the long term. But I think the shipping transition has to be seen in the overall transition which energy industry is going through. And there are substantial changes happening there in the direction of more sustainable fuels, in terms of how we produce, what we produce, etc. To give you an example about just the methane intensity of LNG itself, OGCI participating groups, their upstream methane intensity has gone down by half from between 2017 and 2023. So progress happens when regulations are in place and investments are going in the direction which becomes commercially attractive as well. So in the overall context of energy transition, I would say shipping is also making progress clearly, whether it's through ET or new fuels. I would say definitely in transition.
Okay, and rounding up, actually we've looked at the risks and dependencies. This question goes to all. What does energy security look like? Nitin, I start from you.
I think energy security, as I mentioned at the start, means that customers are able to secure the energy supply which they need at the time they need. Which means flexible value chains, and shipping has a critical role to play there. Yeah, and shipping is made up of course, owners, operators, charterers, fuel suppliers, all have to play their role in terms of contractual flexibilities to be able to supply that. There is a lot of conversation which happens around fuels, but I would like to point out one aspect which has not been mentioned today is just around availability of crew, seafarers, for this supply chain to function and scale as it will need to in the context of growing demand for energy. And I see that as a risk in terms of making it work, specifically as ships evolve, both in terms of new fuels, technology. So attraction of seafarers, their welfare, their training around ability to manage the new tech on the ships is critical, I would say, in addition to fuels.
Philipp, for MB Energy.
Just allow me to a little detour on since I made this cost point on the new fuels. I think what we have to achieve is that the same what we have in the middle distillates in the diesel business, right? So diesel is not only being used for maritime, obviously, it's also it's a base product for jet fuel, for trucks, etc., right? And when we talk about ammonia in our company and the terminal we want to build here within our existing oil terminal, that is not only for shipping. Right? That ammonia will go into a fertilizer. It can be, as Johann said, a hydrogen carrier liquid. Right? So we're going to crack it back, and the hydrogen will be fed into the hydrogen grid. And so on and so forth. You could even think of, Katharina Reiche, our Minister of Economics, plans 50 gas-powered utilities, right? And probably some of which will run on ammonia. And if you think this way, suddenly you have the economies of scale. Suddenly you can justify the 4 times higher capex. So that also becomes attractive for shipping. So that's just a little side note that nobody panics here, please, and leaves the room. Oh my God, it will never be possible. It will be possible, but we have to be smart about that. On the energy security, I think rule number 1, diversification of supply. Germany has been painfully exposed to pipeline gas. I think that is well known, and we are still paying the price for this. I hope this will never happen again. That's basically lesson number 1 in economics. Don't put all eggs in one basket, and obviously also applies to the supply source. Infrastructure, let's take a close look. Who owns it, who runs it, who operates it? Last but not least, unfortunately, in today's world, we also have to keep an eye on sabotage. Right? The amount of drones which fly over our terminals, I will not disclose the numbers, but it's not only at airports, that's what I can tell you. And if somebody is able to put a bomb on Nord Stream, right, the gas pipeline, hundreds of meters below the water level, if that is possible, many other things are also possible. That means diversification also of the transportation mode, right? Not only pipeline, right? Let's also keep in mind rail, let's keep in mind barges, etc., etc. So it's also diversification of the transport mode to increase our security and resilience. Over to you, Johann. If you forgot something.
Johann, last word from you, Johann.
Last word from you.
Almost nothing. And energy security. I'm not afraid of energy security. However, it's constantly changing, particularly, as I mentioned in the beginning, by geopolitical risk, but also by always changing speed and direction of the energy transition. Basically, that's always been the case for shipping. You need to stay agile, look at all these things. It's interesting and alluring sometimes to be first mover. However, it's also dangerous. It comes at a cost. It's not always paying off. On the other hand, we should also not be last mover. So
you don't want to be first. You don't want to be last.
Sometimes we are probably not the first, and when it comes to LNG, I'm still proud today a little bit that we saw this risk coming, that Germany was too much depending on Russian gas, and said, well, let's start an LNG terminal on our premises in Stade, close to Hamburg, which is an ideal location. But it was a risk. If the war wouldn't have happened, it would have been a long road and we didn't calculate the war to come. So, thank you.
Okay. So we would like to thank the panelists. We would like to thank Capital Link, Mr. Bernoullis, and let's give a strong applause for the great panel.